James C. Lucas. James Crittenden Lucas, born June 11, 1912, died November 28, 1998, was an American criminal who served a life sentence in Alcatraz. He is best known for being part of an attempted escape from Alcatraz Penitentiary in 1938, and for attacking Al Capone in the prison's laundry room on June 23, 1936. Born June 11, 1912, Midland County, Texas, U.S. Children, 10. Convictions: first-degree murder of a federal employee and bank robbery. Lucas was originally sentenced to 30 years imprisonment for robbing First National Bank in Albany, Texas, and violation of the Dyer Act, interstate trafficking of stolen vehicles. He arrived at Alcatraz in January 1935 from the Texas State Prison and was known there as James, Texas bank robber, Lucas. Attack on Al Capone.
Al Capone might be the most notorious mobster in American history, but he wasn't a match for James, Tex, Lucas. This 22-year-old bank robber wasn't afraid of anybody. And when the Texas crook met the Chicago gangster in Alcatraz, they didn't exactly get along. Despite the fact he was king of the Chicago mob, Al Capone often found himself on the wrong end of a blade. The first and most famous time someone sliced up Big Al was back when Capone was a little guy working his way up the mobster ladder. After paying a woman a rather questionable compliment, her brother, Frank Gallicchio, pulled a knife and carved up Capone's face, earning him the nickname Scarface. The second time someone stabbed Capone was in 1936, long after the gangster had established himself as public enemy number one. After Capone was sentenced to 11 years for tax evasion, he did a little time in Atlanta before shipping out to the notorious Alcatraz. Once inside, Capone learned that things worked differently on the Rock. While he might have been a big man back in Chicago, he didn't have the same respect out on the island. He found that out the hard way when he met James, Tex, Lucas. Now, Lucas wasn't exactly a big believer in law and order. The young Texan was arrested for bank robbery and auto theft, and in 1934, he was sentenced to 30 years behind bars, eventually ending up in Alcatraz. Despite the fact he was 22 years old, Lucas wasn't a man to be messed with and backed down from no one, not even the most famous mobster in the world. One day, Lucas was waiting in line at the prison barber shop when Capone cut in front. Lucas wasn't going to stand for that and told the gangster to get back at the end of the line. Big Al wasn't used to being told what to do and asked the young crook, "You know who I am, punk?" That's when Lucas grabbed a pair of scissors and shoved them against Capone's throat. "Yeah, I know who you are," he replied, "and if you don't get back to the end of the line, I'm going to know who you were." Capone went back to the end of the line. After that moment, the other inmates lost any and all respect for King Alphonse. His reputation was further damaged after he refused to participate in a prison strike. Believing him to be a rat, several inmates tried to end the gangster's life. One assailant hurled a sash weight at his head, another laced his coffee with lye, and one even tried to strangle him. However, James Lucas was also waiting for another crack at all, Scarface, and on June 23, 1936, he got his chance. As Capone was mopping up the latrine, Lucas sneaked up behind Al and stabbed him in the back with half a pair of scissors. Lucas was sent to solitary confinement for his attack on Capone. After being stabbed, Capone turned and grabbed Lucas and threw him into the wall. The inmates were angry with Capone for not taking part in an inmate strike. After the attack, Lucas was tossed into solitary confinement and lost all his good time, a whopping 3,600 days. When asked why he'd stabbed the mob boss, Tex claimed Capone had threatened to kill him. However, Capone claimed it was because he wouldn't loan Lucas any money. A few years later, Scarface stopped worrying about assassins as he lost his mind, and, eventually, his life, to syphilis. Alcatraz escape attempt. In the spring of 1938, James Lucas, Thomas R. Limerick and Rufus Franklin planned an escape from Alcatraz.
Their escape plan began by incapacitating an unarmed guard supervising a work detail on the top floor. Once the supervisor was rendered unconscious, the convicts would escape through a window to the rooftop, where they would incapacitate an armed guard and leave the island via a seized police boat. They enacted their escape plan on May 23, 1938, in the prison's mat shop, where they assaulted custodial officer Royal Klein with hammer blows to his head. They proceeded to the roof, where armed guard Harold Stites, who was later killed in the 1946 Battle of Alcatraz, shot both Franklin and Limerick, although Lucas wasn't shot. Other guards arrived at the scene. Franklin, Limerick, and Lucas were cornered and surrendered to the guards. Klein died of his injuries the next day, and Thomas Limerick, the other wounded convict, also died. Lucas and the other surviving convict, Rufus Franklin, were tried for murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Afterwards the jury spared them from execution. Lucas spent 6 years in isolation for the incident. He was transferred a few years later, and paroled in 1958. After having a brief stay in prison at McNeil Island for parole violation, he was given a presidential commutation of sentence by Richard Nixon in 1970 and released. He later worked in the oil business.
Despite his crimes, Lucas was eventually paroled in 1958, and excluding a short prison stint for violating parole, lived a relatively crime-free life afterward. He even got married and started a family before passing away in 1998. You've got to wonder if the people attending his funeral knew they were mourning the man who stabbed Al Capone in the back.